Ever feel like you're living in two worlds at once? You know, like the one inside your head and then the one everyone else seems to be in.
Oh, absolutely. That feeling of like internal versus external.
Exactly.
Eh,
And that's what's so fascinating about this particular deep dive. We're getting into someone's journal, they're really personal thoughts, and they're wrestling with that exact thing.
Yeah, it sounds like they're trying to find a balance, but it's tricky. They crave that genuine connection, real relationships. But then at the same time, they find so much comfort and control in their own head.
Yeah, and it's not like they're completely shutting out the world. Like there's this one journal entry where they talk about trying to have a deeper conversation, trying to steer it away from the
Just superficial.
exactly, but it falls flat.
It could be so frustrating.
Right.
And you can see that frustration kind of bleeding into how they view, well, everything. They call their internal world versus the external world.
Makes sense. So what's their internal world like?
Very self-aware, very organized. They even have this whole system of subpersonalities.
Subpersonalities. Okay, now I have to know more. What are we talking about here? Like different versions of themselves?
It's almost like having different lenses, I think.
Yeah.
They use this system to process their experiences, analyze situations.
Wow. So they use these subpersonalities to navigate the external world, which, if they're seeing it as kind of chaotic, I can see how that might be helpful.
Right. It's like they're saying, I figured myself out, but everyone else is the wild card.
Mm.
Although there is this moment of self-doubt where they wonder if it's, have you ever heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect?
Vaguely. It's like the less you know, the more confident you are, right?
Exactly. And they're worried they're falling into that trap, that maybe they're not as insightful as they think they are.
Which is honestly a pretty self-aware thing to admit.
It is. Shows you they're committed to growth, to challenging their own assumptions. And speaking of which, they mention these core values that really guide them: humanity, pragmatism, and sustainability.
Big ones. So they've got this intricate internal world. They're trying to bridge the gap to the external world, and they're all about those values. I'm dying to know how the subpersonalities actually work.
Well, they don't go into a ton of detail in these entries, unfortunately. Like, we don't know exactly what each one represents or anything.
So it's a mystery.
Kind of, yeah. But they do say that they're, like, fluid and multifaceted, not just fixed categories.
Interesting. So maybe it's more about, almost the different modes of thinking they can tap into.
Precisely. Like adapting to the situation at hand.
Yeah.
And, that might be how they find that sense of control they're looking for, right?
Yeah.
They can't control the external world, but they can control how they choose to perceive it.
And that's where I wonder, is this system actually helpful? Especially when it comes to relationships. Like, it's great to understand yourself, but can you really have a deep connection with another person if you're constantly filtering things through...
Through these different lenses. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah, it makes you think, like, how much of yourself can you really share when you've got this, this whole internal system going on?
Right. And what's so interesting is that they actually ask for feedback about it. Like directly in the journal, they're saying, hey, if you're reading this, I'm curious what you think.
Oh, wow. That's pretty brave, putting that out there.
Totally. They want feedback from people who are genuinely curious, though. Not just going to, like, shut them down.
Which, let's be real, is a risk you take when you're talking about something this unconventional. What do you think they're hoping for with that feedback, though? Validation? Or...
I think it's deeper than that. Remember how they mentioned Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Yeah, they're working on self-actualization, right? At the top of the pyramid.
Exactly. And they seem to get that you can't really self-actualize in a bubble. You need other people, other perspectives.
So the feedback is almost like a reality check.
Maybe. Like, here's where I think I am. Here's how I see things. Does that resonate? Or am I way off base?
And I love that they're open to that, even if it means hearing something they don't want to hear. But it can't be easy. I mean, they talk about the external world, especially relationships, as this vast abyss of storm, which, yikes.
Intense, right? You can tell they're really yearning for something deep, but it's hard to find.
And they talk about how, everything's so instant gratification these days, which doesn't exactly help with building those connections.
Definitely not. And that makes me wonder about the subpersonality thing again. Like, if they're always analyzing, always filtering through these different lenses, could that actually be getting in the way?
Interesting point, because vulnerability is kind of messy, right? You can't really control it.
Exactly. And they even mention, the fear of being canceled, of making a mistake and being totally ostracized, which who hasn't felt that these days?
Seriously, it's like, how do you balance wanting to be known with not wanting to get completely torn apart.
It's a tough one. And this is where I think that pragmatism they mentioned comes in. They're not naive about it, but they also seem to get that if you hide yourself completely, you're never going to have those real connections either.
So it's about finding that middle ground.
Right. And it seems like that's what they're working towards, like being discerning about where they put their energy, who they let in.
Which takes us back to that feedback, right? They're not just looking for anyone. They're looking for people who can handle the whole package.
100%. And that, I think, is what makes this whole deep dive so fascinating. They're not afraid to be vulnerable, to ask the tough questions, and to challenge themselves and those around them to really go there.
It's like they're sending up a flare, right? Saying, this is me. This is the work I'm doing. Who's out there? So brave.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it speaks to something, they keep coming back to this idea that real connection, like the deep stuff,
Yeah.
it takes two people who are both willing to put in the effort.
Yeah, it's not about finding someone to complete you. It's about, more like finding someone who's on a similar journey and you can walk alongside each other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that not everyone is ready for that kind of journey, you know?
Oh, for sure. And they seem to get that. It's like they're saying, hey, if you can't handle my baggage, all this internal stuff, the subpersonalities, the whole deal, that's fine.
But you're not the right person for me.
Right. And as much as that might sting a little, it's also incredibly self-aware, right? Knowing your own worth and not settling for less. But that brings us back to the subpersonalities. I feel like we've been circling them this whole time, but I'm still kind of fuzzy on the detail.
It's true. They're a little mysterious.
Do they have names? Roles?
Well, remember, we're working with what we've got here.
Yeah.
They never actually get into the specifics in the journal.
Yeah.
But we can kind of piece some things together. Like there's one they mentioned that seems to be all about logic, about taking a step back from a situation, almost like an internal mediator.
Oh, interesting. So instead of getting caught up in the emotion of something, they can kind of tap into that subpersonality and be like, okay, let's analyze this.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's another one that's all about empathy, about really connecting with how other people are feeling.
Wow. So they've basically built this like internal toolbox with all these different skills and perspectives they can use.
That's a really cool way to think about it.
But they do mention that not everyone gets it. Like some people have been kind of skeptical, even made fun of them for it.
Yeah, it's definitely not your average approach to personal growth. It takes a certain openness, I guess, to even consider it.
Totally. And it makes you think, like, how do you stay true to that, to those parts of yourself that are different when not everyone's going to get it?
It's a constant balancing act, right? But I think it goes back to finding your people, you know? The ones who see your weirdness as a feature, not a bug.
It's like that saying, something about waves in the ocean. The people who are meant to be in your life will always find their way back to you.
I love that. And it feels really relevant here, you know?
Mm-hmm.
This idea that the people who are right for you, they'll get it. And the ones who don't, well, they were never meant to stick around anyway.
It's kind of comforting, actually. But as we start to wrap up this deep dive, I guess the question is, what do we take away from all of this whole journey into someone else's internal world?
Honestly, what sticks with me the most is just how personal growth really is. Like, there's no one right way to do it. It's messy, it's nonlinear, it can even involve imaginary subpersonalities.
Which, hey, no judgment here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think the important thing is just keep going, keep exploring, keep questioning.
And to keep looking for those real, genuine connections. Because those are the ones that make it all worthwhile.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, on that note, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this deep dive. But listeners, I have a feeling this conversation isn't over just because we're hitting stop on the mics reels. I bet you're already thinking about what your own subpersonalities might be. And you know what? That's awesome. Keep exploring that. Keep diving deep into the most fascinating subject of all, yourselves. Until next time.